Today we are going to read about the system calls. In this lecture we are going to understand what are system calls. System calls provides an interface to the service made available by an operating system. So we know that our operating system provides us with certain services. Now the system call, what they do is they provide an interface to the services that are available by the operating system. So before we try to understand system calls in a more detailed way, there are two important points that we need to know. There are two modes in which a program can execute. They are called the user mode and the kernel mode. So let's try to understand what are these user mode and kernel mode. So these user mode and kernel mode are the two modes in which a program can execute. So if a program is executing in user mode, then that program does not have direct access to the memory, the hardware and such resources. But if a program is executing in kernel mode, then that program has the direct access to the memory, the hardware and such resources. So we say that if a program is executing in kernel mode, then it is in a privileged mode because it is having direct access to many of the resources. But the problem is that when a program is executing in a kernel mode and if that program happens to crash during its execution, then the entire system would crash or it comes to a halt. So that is one problem of kernel mode. But if a program is executing in user mode and if it crashes, then the entire system does not crash or the entire system does not come to a halt. If the program is executing in user mode, so user mode is a safer mode of operation, through kernel mode is the privileged mode. So these are two modes of operation in which a program can execute. So we say that the user mode is the safest mode, and because of that most of the programs execute in user mode. But when a program is executing in user mode, it may need access to some of the resources like memory, hardware and so on. So when the program needs access to these resources, it makes a call to the operating system telling that it needs access to certain resources. So it makes a call. And when it makes that call, what happens is that for an instance, the program is switched from user mode to kernel mode. So it can use those resources. So there is a switching that happens. So when a program switches from user mode to kernel mode is known as context switching. And even when it switches back to user mode from kernel mode, that is also known as context switching. So when the program makes a call to the operating system saying I need to use this particular resource, the context switch happens where the user mode is switched to the kernel mode so that the program can use those resources. And then the call, I was talking about the call that the program makes in order to access those resources or to go into the kernel mode, that call is known as the system call. So we see that the system call are made by the program when it needs access to certain resources. So when a program is executing in user mode and it needs to be switched to kernel mode for a particular time, this system call is made. So this is one of the ways in which we can understand what a system call. So system call is the programmatic way in which a computer program requests a service from the kernel of the operating system. So this is what I told you. When it wants to request a service from the kernel of the operating system, the service could be anything like accessing some resources or anything a system call is made for doing so. These calls are generally available as routines written in C and C++. So this is the way we can define a system call.